Breaking news, President Trump just wrapped up a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The U.S. president says they spoke on the phone for approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. I want to bring back CNN's Kristen Holmes live from the White House. So, Kristen, what did Trump say about this call?
Yeah, Manu, he really dives into two separate things. One, what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, and two, the deal with Iran. So let's start with reading this post because this is really the White House's version of a readout of the call. He says he just finished speaking by telephone with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. The call lasted approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. We discussed the attack on Russia's docked airplanes by Ukraine and also various other attacks that have been taking place on both sides. It was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace. President Putin did say, and very strongly, that he will have to respond to the recent attack on the airfield. We also discussed Iran and the fact that time is running out on Iran's decision pertaining to nuclear weapons, which must be made quickly. I stated to President Putin that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and on this, I believe that we were in agreement. President Putin suggested that he will participate in the discussions with Iran and that he could perhaps be helpful in getting this brought to a rapid conclusion. It is my opinion that Iran has been slow walking their decision on this very important matter, and we will need a definitive answer in a very short period of time. So let's break these into two separate camps because that's what they are. They're two separate deals that are going on here. One, this gives us absolutely no insight into what's happening between these conversations with Ukraine and Russia. In fact, it does seem from this that there is no end in sight. Vladimir Putin telling Donald Trump that he's going to retaliate for those attacks in Ukraine. One of the things that I've been talking to White House officials about was the fact that they were looking at the idea that Russia and Ukraine had come to the table and had these direct talks as a positive, but understood that there was no peace. Clearly here, Putin is saying, I'm going to continue to fight this war. One thing that I think is very interesting here, you have to keep in mind, the White House has said over and over again that Ukraine did not give the White House a heads up about their attacks on Russia and on their airfields, those drone attacks. Obviously here, Putin learning from that lesson and telling Donald Trump in advance what he was planning to do, or at least giving him an overview. Now, the other part of this, of course, is the Iran deal. We know that the White House, the special envoy Steve Witkoff, presented a new deal to Iran over the weekend. Donald Trump has said over and over again that they cannot have any uranium, they cannot enrich any uranium at all. He is now seemingly enlisting Vladimir Putin in helping with the discussions with Iran, saying that he agrees with him. And one important thing to note here is that we've really seen over the past year or so, since the Russia-Ukraine war, a form of a partnership between Russia and Iran, their partnership growing stronger. So now it seems as though Donald Trump is kind of enlisting Vladimir Putin to help with those discussions. How this is going to play out, it's a very interesting twist here on how these deals are both separately now kind of coming together, and Donald Trump seems to be relying on Putin more in Iran, but not really facing anything that's going on with Ukraine.
All right, Kristen Holmes with the breaking news from the White House. Thank you so much. And back here in the room, just to break down this post, I mean, no immediate peace. That seems pretty significant. It means this war is going to go on, despite these talks that have been trying to materialize over the last several weeks. And then saying that President Putin did say, and very strongly, that's in Trump's words, that Putin will have to respond to the recent attack on the airfields.
I found the tone of this as it relates to the Russian leader really interesting, because it was about a week and a half ago where Trump posted on Truth Social that Vladimir Putin has gone, quote, absolutely crazy. We also remember the other social media post where he said, Vladimir, stop, basically, with all the violence. And especially as Putin has shown no signs that he's going to relieve or let up on this aggression towards Ukraine, you're really seeing a growing impatience from Capitol Hill. You have this sanctions package that's supposed to be the toughest set of sanctions against Russia. It has 81 co-sponsors in the Senate. And obviously, the continued aggression from Putin is going to add momentum to that. But what I find really interesting is President Trump does not seem to be on board quite yet with that package. There was a quote from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt with our friends at Semaphore. She said, the decision to impose sanctions will come from the commander-in-chief, i.e. not Congress.
Yeah, and he didn't say here. He didn't say, sanctions may be coming, Vladimir, or nothing like that.
There was an omission of threats. There's also an omission of him saying when he was told by Putin that Putin was going to respond, quote, very strongly, I urged him not to. I condemned the idea of it. I said that would be destructive to the efforts to find. There's none of that, and obviously we don't know what exactly was said. I think it is a very Trumpian play, although it has also been something utilized by other U.S. leaders of both parties. All right, how do you leverage Russia in other foreign issues that you're dealing with, particularly if it's a proliferation-related issue? It's not exclusive to Trump, but his decision here, or very clear effort to try and thread a couple of things together to try and reach an outcome, it's something that apparently might lead to an imminent strike, as he seems to be implying there.
Those two things I think are very connected. The
Yeah.
reason he is just a reporter on what Putin was saying about Ukraine and no value judgment and not wanting to be active engaged, he wants to wash his hands of it, that is directly tied to, look what I'm doing here. I'm not weighing in on that, Vladimir. I need your help here. But it's also interesting, he says things like, perhaps he could be helpful. I think we're in agreement that they shouldn't have nuclear. It doesn't seem like he has Putin's total buy-in to what he wants him to do on Iran either.
He said Putin responded, he said it very strongly that he'll have to respond to the recent attacks.
I'm going to go to Nick Robertson, who is following this breaking news story. And Nick, I'm seeing that Yuri Ushakov, who's the Russian presidential aide, also commenting on this call, saying Vladimir Putin spoke in detail about the results of the second round of direct Russian-Ukraine negotiations in Istanbul. As was emphasized, he says, Ukraine tried to disrupt these negotiations by carrying out, under direct orders of the Kyiv regime, targeted attacks on purely civilian targets, on the peaceful population. This is clearly classified as terrorism by international law, and in our opinion, the Kyiv regime has essentially turned into a terrorist organization. He did go on a bit, but this was the standout quote for me. This does not look to me, Nick, and you and I were talking about this, that we are any close at all to any sort of ceasefire negotiations or even Putin coming to the negotiating table.
Not at all. In fact, President Zelensky has been making that point that the talks in Istanbul aren't going anywhere, and the best way to resolve this is talks directly between the leaders, President Zelensky and President Putin. He said President Trump and other key leaders could be there as well, and the Kremlin has also turned that down. So I think what we're hearing from these Russian officials is very much a version of the additional things that Putin will have undoubtedly communicated with Trump, that the breakdown in talks, because of course Putin will portray himself as wanting to have talks and be the peacemaker here and blaming it all on Ukraine that it's not happening. This idea that Ukraine is involved in terrorist activities seems to come about from the targeting of a couple of railway bridges, strategic railway bridges in Russia, that Ukraine hasn't taken or claimed responsibility for, but did collapse on tracks, and there were civilians injured and killed, according to the Russians. You have to sort of suspend imagination and belief and suspend everything here when listening to Russia criticize Ukraine for hitting civilians, when every day our screens are full of images of Russia's missiles, artillery, drones slamming into civilians in cities going about their daily lives. So, but this will be the talking points that President Putin will have been pushing on President Trump. And we know that President Trump, tends to listen to the last person in the room with him. And you only have to listen to the way, and Kevin was laying it out there, but the way that President Trump characterized the phone call. Putin told me he would have to respond to these strikes. And in that language, he would have to respond. As Kevin says, we don't know what direction Trump tried to push Putin in not to respond. But that characterization, he has to respond. That sounds very much like the language you would expect Putin to be using. I have to respond to this. We know that there's been discussion about a big prisoner exchange coming up for this weekend, 1,200 prisoners on each side, Ukraine, Russia. But think back to a week and a half ago when 1,000 prisoners, big at the time, biggest ever, were exchanged. Russia that weekend mounted a massive barrage of drone, the biggest aerial bombardment on the Saturday into Sunday, the biggest drone strikes ever on the Sunday into the Monday. When Russia tries to portray themselves A, as the victim, and B, as the peacemakers here, it sounds, it's going to sound very empty in Kyiv.